Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming after the lunch break. I am Kiki, data journalist and project manager at the iMEdD team, and we are here today to discuss open data availability and public bodies' response to journalistic demands for releasing information in diverse corners of the globe. So, of course, I would like immediately to introduce our distinguished speakers to you. It's Eva Belmonte, investigative journalist and director at Civio, a non-profit independent outlet in Spain with the mission to achieve true transparency in public affairs. At Civio, they share their data, their sources, and their methodologies so that anyone can use them, and they have achieved many prestigious national and international awards. Civio is also a member of the European Data Journalism Network, comprising over 30 members across Europe, iMEdD included. So, Eva, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Kateryna Reznikova, investigative journalist and editor at the Kloop, a well-known independent outlet which has been contributed to the growth of investigative and data journalism in Kyrgyzstan, a country which fell 50 places in RSF World Press Freedom Index in 2023, and Kloop faced recent authorities' attempts to close it down and is currently blocked in Kyrgyzstan. At the Kloop, Kateryna is engaged in investigating corruption in post-Soviet countries. She's a winner of many journalistic awards in Central Asia, and her story on corruption in public procurement was shortlisted for the Sigma Data Journalism Award. Kateryna, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Then we have Jeremy Singervine, director at the Data Liberation Project, a US-based initiative to identify, obtain, reformat, clean, publish, and disseminate government data sets of public interest. Since 2015, he has also been publishing Data is Plural, a weekly and most impactful, if I may, newsletter of useful and curious data sets that are out there. Jeremy served as the data editor for BuzzFeed News, and before that, he worked at the Wall Street Journal and Slate magazine. Thanks, Jeremy, for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Last but not least, Augustine Zenakos, a Greek journalist, founding member and editor-in-chief of the Manifold, a non-profit investigative outfit with members in Athens, Nicosia, and London, founded in 2018. They do in-depth journalism in the public interest, focusing on complex issues that require long-term commitment to illuminate and contextualize. Investigations into child protection system in Greece, police violence and impunity, energy and climate crisis in the country are among their so-called the Manifold files. Hello, Augustine. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, so instead of like an opening statement or something on my end, I would like to just encourage you to go visit our website, lab.imed.org, and find a feature by Greek journalist Elisa Triantafylou, who is here, by the way, published last March, titled The Slow Death of Open Data in Greece. Alternatively, you could go visit our official state open data platform, data.gov.gr, and go check out the last time each different data set available there is updated. You won't need too much time. It's just 52 data sets for 10 different verticals of public life and interest. So let's open up our discussion by defining what open data is. So let's just share what everyone here means when referring to open data. Who wants to go first? Jeremy, probably.
Sure. Thanks for hosting this. In the US, I think we have a fairly maybe strict or narrow definition that I think most journalists would work with when they're talking about open data, and this would be data proactively published by the government about government records, so things that activities of the government. There are ways we get data from the government, eventually making them open, like FOIA requests, which is a lot of the work I focus on, and that we could call transparency work. But in my mind, in kind of my line of work, open data is something that the government has decided themselves to publish for the public.
Eva?
Yeah, for us, it's, of course, it's just the technical part, like this data can be readable by machines and so on. But for us, when we talk on open data, and that's because we don't have a lot of real interest in open data being published by the government, we talk about any open data independently of the author, of who is creating this. That's why sometimes when we create databases and we publish and we share them, we say, okay, we are doing open data, although we are not the government publishing it directly. But for me, the most important thing on the open data is what is, rather than what is not open data, because sometimes most governments, I think, voluntarily, they mix it. If you check most of the open data portal in general administration and local administrations in Spain, there are a bunch of PDFs with a lot of numbers there. So that's not open data. That's like the main thing to differentiate them.
Thank you. Augustine, let's talk ideal scenarios now.
Yeah, because the simplest answer is open data is that which we do not have. So, yeah, I totally understand the necessity from a data journalist's point of view to kind of define open data also technically, because, I mean, in theory, otherwise it could be anything. But I think for us here in Greece, it's quite useful to broaden the definition as much as possible, because that's our main problem. We lack information and we lack transparency from the government and also authorities more generally, not just the government. So I'd say that for us, since there is no proactiveness, in fact, we can't really define open data as that which is willingly, proactively shared by the government. It would be anything that actually contains facts, verifiable facts in the form of some document or other, which we could get our hands on. So I'd say it as broadly as that. So a minister in parliament announcing a string of numbers about something is not what we mean. It's something, whether it be a government decision or a budget or anything, basically any sort of document that you can actually verify.
Okay, thank you. And Kateryna?
I agree with Augustine. We have no open data at all, I think, because we have a lot of data sets of public government records, but they are unreliable. First of all, it's the main problem. For example, we have a database of court statements and sentences, and there is no information about high-ranked corrupt politicians. And when we tried to request these verdicts, our request was rejected because of protection of private information. So we have a lot of data sets, but now we are dealing with not opening but closing data in Kyrgyzstan.
What kind of data would you all think that we as journalists should pursue to be released?
Everything.
Yeah, we should decide. That would be the main point. Like, everything should be open. Everything that happens in a public administration should be open. So you will decide as a journalist, that's your main job, deciding what is a new or what not. But for me, and maybe it's because it's one of the main gaps we have in Spain, all the data linked to conflicts of interest, how the decision-making process, like, we don't have data on why they made this decision, this policy, not another one. We don't know if they are doing something for private gain or because of the public interest. We cannot, there's no accountability on that. So I would love, for example, I don't know if in other countries, but for example, we have this not open data, but it's published information on the money they have, the lawmakers, if they have 2 houses, mortgage, and some money in the bank. And we, for example, know they have some money in stocks when we don't know in which companies. So I would love, for example, to know in which companies politicians are investing, and if this has some conflict of interest. And on the other way, for example, in public procurement, we have some ugly, horrible data. We need to work with us every time we want to investigate something on public procurement, but we cannot mix this with real information on ultimate owners, who is owning this company, the relations with some deputies or whatever. So everything related to the relation between public and private and on corruption will be great to have data, but it's where the main gaps are.
Jeremy, would you like to add something?
Sure. I think public procurement's a great example. And there are some countries that publish it, some that don't. If you're interested in checking out a very cool project, you can look for something called Open Contracting. I think it's called opencontracting.org, and they're centralizing all of the open data on contracts, public procurement, from, at this point, I think dozens of countries around the world. I think that's something eventually that should be universal. Taking an example from the US, I think one of the data sets that is open that sort of proves the power and the usefulness of open data is campaign spending for election campaigns. It's something we've had access to for a long time. A lot of countries don't have access to, and has led to a lot of really powerful investigative stories.
Kateryna, what would you prioritize if you could in terms of what kind of data of public interest we as journalists should chase for?
We lack data sets about climate change and about air and water pollution. It's almost half of our population, rural population, have no access to the clear water, and we have a very high rate of air pollution, the highest, actually, higher than in Chinese towns. But we have only a few sensors that was installed by international organizations in our country, and no one by a government. So we have no data about such important things.
Augustine, your turn.
I don't know really what my priority would be. I mean, we lack so much. I'd rather say that maybe my priority would be to fix how the things that are currently being disclosed are actually presented, because I think this is really important. When we talk about available data, it's not just any old form that facilitates us to actually tell a story or to describe a problem or an issue, because that's what we want to do. We want to get a picture about what's going on. So just to give an example with which perhaps people who live in Greece are more familiar, we do actually have a platform where expenditure of all kinds and government decisions of all kinds do get published in Greece.
You speak about the Avia,
The
right?
Avia, yes. But it is so difficult to use, it is so confusing, so badly designed from the point of view of actually extracting information, that if you're looking, for example, for something specific, say you want to learn how much money a municipality received for a certain task in a year and how much of it they spent, which should be quite a simple question to answer. It's actually not, because you need to follow so many steps in that procedure, which will actually be separate documents in this database. There will be things that have to do with the state budget allocation. There would be approval decisions from the municipality, which may have discrepancies. There will be the actual orders to credit that money to the municipality, which again may have huge gaps of time. Then you will have the actual municipality accounts at the end of the year, where you will be able to see if they spent this and how much of it they spent. But a lot of the time, it might go on to the next year. They might not have spent it during that year, et cetera, et cetera. So imagine now that you want to do this not for one municipality, but say for the country. You want to see a policy at the local level. You want to monitor a policy at the local level. So now suddenly you have 300 municipalities that you need to decode. So the way these things are presented, the way they are actually given to us is very, very confusing. So it's either that, it's over, you kind of get buried in documents where you can never be sure if you have it all, or it's the opposite. It's totally aggregated. It's totally processed. So it's essentially statistics. It's not the data. It's their statistics. So maybe my priority would be for them to learn the value of publishing the actual raw data of each single thing and let researchers draw some conclusions on their own.
Yeah, I was about to go into, after all the ideal scenarios, I was about to go into the problems and the challenges we all face, because I would very much like to discuss the situation in your own countries, and you already kind of did it for Greece. So when they asked me how I could summarize the situation, if I have to tell it in one line, I always say, I'm gonna quote a collaborator who at some point said, in Greece, what it happens is that it looks like it's open, but it won't be. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also a great predicament for us in the international discussion, because Greece is reputed to be a more or less functioning democracy, a relatively high-income country, all this stuff, which is totally not the case on the ground. And a lot of the time we fall through the cracks in a discussion that has to do with press freedom and openness and generally the state of our democracy. Quite a lot of the time we're like, oh yeah, these guys are okay because it kind of looks that way, but it isn't.
Kateryna, could you please give us the political and general context in Kyrgyzstan to help us understand what speaking about open data and, of course, pursuing data and information means for you. And by the way, I did not mention at the beginning that a lawsuit is filed against the Kloop since last August, right? And you are going, you're having a court appointment in early October. In between, Kloop was blocked. So could you elaborate on the political context and press freedom issues to help us understand what exactly speaking about open data means for you?
Yeah, sure. First of all, for many years, Kyrgyzstan was the freest country in the region, in the Central Asia, with a high rank of democracy and freedom of speech. And it's explainable because we are a very poor country. For a long time, Kyrgyzstan was a part of Russian Empire and then Soviet Union, and then Kyrgyzstan became an independent country. The people of Kyrgyzstan was trying to rebuild new society based on the principles of democracy. So we are depending on grants from foreign donors, and this is the main things that forces our government to be open for citizens. And now our last president turned our country into dictatorship, literally in 1 year. We have 3 kinds of pressure now. First, the prosecutor of Bishkek, the capital, filed the lawsuit to the court, and he is accused us of lack of media license. It's true, but we didn't violate the law, because by law in Kyrgyzstan, internet media is not required to have a license at all. We have a public entity. It's some kind of foundation. We are supporting young journalists, and we are offered the platform to publishing all their opinions. And the second kind of pressure, we know now that the National Security Service started the crime case against the Kloop, and they accuse us of calls to the violent overthrows. It's not true. Yeah. But we have this case, and during this inquiry, they ordered the forensic assessment, and pro-government experts said that Kloop and its publications literally cause sexual anomalies, mental disorders, and drug addiction. So the investigations in Kyrgyzstan are very dangerous. Don't read it at all, please, people. And the third type of pressure, the Ministry of Culture has blocked our website. Because there is some kind of fake news, but we couldn't even prove our position, because now, by law, the Ministry of Culture can block any website in the country without any trial. So we cannot go to court and prove our position at all. Now our website is blocked, and some months ago, there was the same situation with another media outlet in Kyrgyzstan, Azattyk Radio. It's a branch of famous Radio Liberty from USA, and they made a deal with the government. They deleted all the fake information from their website. And when they heard about it, it was the terrible day in our life, I think, because it's the end of freedom of speech in the country. So now we are working on our investigations, mostly abroad. Our journalists have to move from the Kyrgyzstan to another safety countries, and we are trying to collect all the data because, as I said previously, we are dealing with not opening but with the closing of data. Now we have some deleted, we have some cases of information, when information was deleted at all. For example, for 15 years, our officials have been published their declarations of incomes and assets. And this year, Kyrgyzstan adopted a law that officials do not submit these declarations, but all of the old information was deleted, and a paper copies of these declarations was literally burned out in giant oven at the outskirts of Bishkek, the capital. So we have no historical data at all, not on papers, neither on the internet.
But you have backups?
Yes, we have a backup, but...
And what are you doing with them?
Sometimes we are publishing some stories about these declarations. For example, this year we published a story about our officials who has a cattle. Our officials could hide their incomes buying a cattle. Very expensive horses, and nobody counts them because they are somewhere out there, Bishkek, in the mountains, on the pastures, and no one has seen them, and no one counts them. So we go through all these declarations and made some story about these expensive horses and millions of dollars that was hidden by this scam.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing all this with us. Eva, could you walk us through the situation in Spain and what is like the current situation in terms of data openness and information release in general?
Yeah, sure. This is when I complain about Spain. I'm gonna do it for sure, but I just want to be honest and say I say it before to Catherine. I feel kind of ridiculous complaining about the situation in Spain, close to you, because it's like I'm not facing any consequences to be in trials against the government or to publishing specific information. So I can tell how the situation is, but I really want to say out loud that we need to cover first the basics of doing journalism, like everyone can do it safely and without someone publishing shit or clashing your webpage, and then we can talk on open data for sure. But talking about Spain, they are always talking about how open we are. We have a lot, there's not a small village in Spain with no open data portal. They all have one. It's super cool to have it. but they don't publish useful or open information at all. Mostly they publish bus stops or I don't know how many people is living in that village in PDF, so it's not so useful. And so what we normally do is do a freedom of information request and ask for some information. So this is like the typical circle. We ask for data, they say no, or normally they ignore us. If they don't ignore us, they say no. Then we go to the Transparency Council. If they say you're right, you have the right to have this information, then the government ignore them or bring us to court. So right now we are in several trials with the government. And I want just to point that some, for example, we are in some trials against the government and some pharma companies because we want to know the price they're paying for specific medicines. Okay, we can discuss if this should be commercial, private information or not. But for example, we went to trial because the government didn't want to publish the names of the people working in a ministry. You know, the advisors, these people, they are naming like directly without public offers or something. They don't want to say the names. I'm not saying the salaries or something. I'm saying who is working at the ministry. So we ask for it. They say no for personal data reasons. Okay, it's your fucking name. It's not so personal. And then at the end, we finish in the trial. So we went to trial, we won. And then the next year, we ask again for these names, and they say no again. Because they are spending money, it's not theirs. So they can go to trial every time. So at the end, it's kind of frustrating because you are going to trial and you are receiving no's as an answer the whole time. But at the end, all the consequences I face with that is they hate me a lot. A lot of public workers hate me, but it's not so bad. It's okay, it's part of my job. And maybe they do some declarations saying, okay, we are publishing fake news and whatever. They're trying to say we are not rigorous journalists and so on. But that's all the consequences, or going to trial. But there are no more personal consequences for me doing journalism. That's why I feel, I'm being honest, I feel kind of ridiculous right now.
Jeremy, to be honest, I should tell that I guess that most of us, including probably people in the audience, would consider that doing investigative data journalism in the States should be a comparatively favorable condition. So is that the case or not?
Absolutely. I mean, like in Spain and maybe even more, we're in a very privileged position in the US operating as journalists and data journalists, and we have fairly powerful but not perfect freedom of information laws. And we even have an executive order from 2013 from the Obama administration that said agencies should operate on the default of providing their data to the public in machine-readable formats. In reality, although some agencies do that with some data sets, like Eva was saying, mostly they publish the data they want to publish, the data that doesn't cause any real problems. A lot of this is valuable data. It's public service data, right? People do care where bus stops are.
Yeah, it's okay.
But it's not the sort of data that helps hold the government or powerful entities accountable. There are counterexamples. Campaign finance data is a great example of open data that is powerful tool for accountability journalism. But the real struggle, I think, or we have a few difficulties with open data in the US. One is it's generally just uncontroversial data, data that is convenient to publish. Another is the format question, I think. We've all mentioned that in one way or the other. Even though the mandate, the executive order says you have to publish machine-readable formats, they're talking about Excel or CSV or XML, whatever. A lot of agencies still publish data as PDFs. I've literally spent hundreds of hours of my life writing software to extract that data from PDFs because it is such a common problem we have. And I think the third is where you go from talking about having something be open in a technical sense, the files are online, and being accessible to the public. Data, especially as the data becomes more and more complex, not just where is the bus stop, but maybe the state of different regulatory inspections or things like this. The data becomes more complex. It becomes, A, more important to understand it well, and B, more difficult to understand. And a lot of the problem we have in the US is an agency may publish the data, but no real guidance or information that would help you interpret it correctly. So we have to do a lot of extra reporting to understand how to use it well. And I think also, from a safety and democracy standpoint, we're also privileged. We get criticized and things like that, but we're pretty safe, and I'm grateful for that.
Let's go into your solutions, your initiatives. So, yeah, Jeremy, what drove you to initiate the Data Liberation Project, how it works, and how it has been evolving so far? Sure,
yeah. Everything I said that's wrong with government data, open data now is kind of the motivation for me to start the Data Liberation Project. I've been filing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests in the US for data for a while as part of my newsroom work. And there's a lot that's great about that, and I don't want to take anything away from the way people do FOIA in newsrooms, but I also felt like it wasn't taking the full advantage of what FOIA can offer to the public when it comes to data. A lot of the times we were filing requests for data sets, and maybe they'd come back and we were already working on something else and we didn't have the time to look at it. Or we looked at it and there wasn't really a story for us. We couldn't figure out what we were going to do with the data. And in a lot of those cases, not all of them, the data would sit on our hard drive, kind of forever. Even if we did get data we found useful, we'd want to do a big investigation based on it. And that might mean not publishing the data for months or a year. And that, although it's understandable, newsrooms want exclusive stories for a good reason, it did mean that the data a lot of newsrooms publish is out of date in some way. And the third part is, although more and more American, US newsrooms are publishing the data that they get through stories, the publishing part isn't really their core focus, and although they want to make it useful to people, they don't really have the time, or they don't prioritize, we don't prioritize making it really useful to people. You might publish a few paragraphs about what the data is and kind of how you might want to use it, but I felt strongly that part of making data available and accessible to people, it's not really accessible if you don't understand it. So the Data Liberation Project, I'm filing the FOIAs along with collaborators and volunteers. We're getting the data back. We're trying to process it into formats that are more useful and to really document it, to make public documentation available so that anybody can analyze it, find a story in it, find an angle for public policy in it. It's not exclusively for journalists, and to treat data as sort of a public resource, as sort of infrastructure for journalism and for other activities.
Eva, I know that you at Civio have been lobbying with the government to promote the opening of data. Lobbying is a controversial issue for journalists. Yeah. It is something that journalists usually wish to investigate rather than performing.
You can do both. You can do both.
Okay, so how did you do that, and how people can do that in a transparent way?
Well, I know for a lot of journalists, because I lobby, I'm not a pure journalist. I'm not a real journalist because I go to the Congress and with my jacket and my high heels and talk to politicians and try to change a law. But and I totally understand that. Maybe I'm not so pure journalist, but I think I am. But what we do is, most of times is because we find something in our investigations that we think it should be published to continue investigating that, and it's not. So most of the lobby we do is to force them, or including in the law articles who force them to publish data that we really believe it's important for journalists. So first, we only lobby to improve journalism. So we only lobby to more things to be published. We don't lobby to, I don't know, to change the laws on marriage or subsidies or whatever. We lobby to improve information, to improve the tool for journalists. And one of the rules we have, and I think this is quite important, is we only lobby after publishing. So when I'm beginning an investigation, I decide to investigate a new topic, I'm not thinking, oh, I should change that because it's bad. No, I'm thinking I need to explain that because it's important and see what's happening there. Then once, because our investigations are so long, you became kind of an expert on the topic, so you can go and, because you know the law and whatever, and you can do that. So first rule is after publishing, always, only on this, on publishing more information. And then the third rule is being super transparent on the whole process. We publish our recommendations, we write down the articles of the law. We don't write general recommendations for politicians. I do their job. I write the articles of the law that I send to the political parties. First I publish it, and then we check what happened at the end. We managed to change, for example, the public procurement law. And I remember I was the only civil society something lobbying in that public procurement law. At the other side, there were these super big construction companies and so on. And we wanted to change just one article, the article saying which information should they publish from each contract. And we managed to change it. I want to make this search saying I changed the 33 article of the public procurement law. So we do that. I know it's a strange thing for a journalist to do, but sometimes we feel like only explaining and trying to investigate and being stopped the whole time because there is no data, it's not enough.
Time is always flying, so I would have many more questions. Augustine, I would like to hear briefly from you before going to any Q&A, and we hope we have any questions. Could you refer to ways or solutions you at the Manifold have found in order to overcome public bodies' unresponsiveness in Greece?
Yes, okay, very briefly. With regard to data that they, or more generally, documents and information that it can actually somehow be located, but they're not being published, the only solution we've found is good old manual labor. So we're having to actually compile a kind of data set ourselves. So, for example, with incidents of police violence, which we have been following very closely, what we do is we try get together a kind of, well, basically it's a kind of spreadsheet, I suppose, with a very specifically codified way of following each incident through either the judicial process or whatever data we want to collect. And then we continue doing this for every incident that we can actually pinpoint, which is very time-consuming, it's very expensive, et cetera, et cetera. I think that what's important is that FOIAs are a very good idea, but they are also expensive for small organizations, just the legal professionals that you need in order to do this. And when you're lacking so much, if you're having to do this all the time, it's actually not a very good option for us. It would be amazing, and for many times we thought of maybe if we could get quite a few organizations together that would kind of pull resources and do this in a systematic way, it might help, but it hasn't happened up to now. And one last important thing for which there is no immediate solution, but perhaps a kind of lobbying might be useful, is the kind of data that you cannot actually collect because it's not being recorded. And that's something we don't often talk about. I have examples, maybe in the Q&A we can talk about it, but it's things that the competent bodies or competent authorities are not actually collecting at all, and they are kind of black holes with regard to administration, or the welfare system is one such case where there is very important information actually not being recorded. So even if you filed FOIA, you wouldn't get it because they don't have it. And that's, I think that's also an important issue that should be discussed at some point.
It's time to see if any people in the audience have any questions. Yeah, sure.
Okay. One topic which often overlooked is digital data preservation. We know there is a lot of thought about preserving analog data, but how about digital? Because sometimes a number of social media and media outlets lost a large portion, or all the lost all their content for various reasons, like, for example, lack of interest or by accident. Compared to unlike lost data, I haven't seen these people talking much about it, not only in general, but here. What do you think? Already say, Kateryna, already say some serious situation. But how about this happens also in USA culture, even in USA, for example? How do you feel about it?
Okay, who wants to take this regarding archive information, analogic information, and what we might miss from there that we could use?
I think most of the interesting stuff is in analogic way right now, but we've been talking a lot of countries where there is not real useful open data for journalists. And for me, one of the problems is in some places there is not anything. For example, there is no agenda in the meetings or something. So sometimes there is no, and there never will be data on something that could be interesting for a journalist.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
So basically in Greece we don't have open data, that's a fact. And therefore my question would be, do you draw a line somewhere regarding the sources? Because you have spoken about open data from the side of the state. But when that fails, there are other sources like private companies or the dark web or a source. Is there a line regarding where do you get the data from and then how do you evaluate it? Thank you.
Who wants to answer this?
Well, with regard to Greece, yeah, there are other sources. Obviously, not necessarily in an organized, machine-readable or codified way, but there are other ways to get the data. As far as lines are concerned, well, I can't at the moment. I can imagine there'd be some lines to be drawn. One obvious line is that we wouldn't pay for it. But other than that, provided the source is legitimate and truthful, yeah, we'd take it. Can't imagine why we wouldn't. Yeah.
At the end, it's the same that doing traditional journalism. It's like checking the sources and decide if it's reliable, or check if there's another source you can compare with, but it's not so different from traditional journalism.
I think we should take only one. So, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So, Eva, you said that like each time you go to a transparency court, to be proved right, then the government brings you to trial, and it's like a vicious circle. Is there a way to stop it? Oh, sorry, and I have a second question. Is there a European regulation to, about open data, and can this be used for you against the states, or is mostly like the state taking advantage of this EU regulation?
If you are quick, we're going to take the other one as well, and then we're going to stop.
Yeah, we've been meeting with government officials a lot of time. We asked the political parties to include in their campaign promises not to sue everything that the Transparency Council says. And they put in their programs, they say they're going to do it, but they are not doing it. And about the legislation, there's a European legislation on open data. In Spain, they are not doing everything that is mandatory. But the most important thing is there's a European legislation on FOIA requests, freedom of information requests. And sometimes when the Spanish government doesn't answer us, we ask Europe for it, for the data. And then Europe say to the Spanish government, they should give us the data. So you can use Europe as the big brother.
Thanks. Okay, the last one.
I would like to ask about a potential conflict between publicly available data or data that are being available for companies when they pay or when they lobby. For example, there are really valuable data for companies who want to develop enterprises, apps, etc. For example, real estate data. Is there a conflict that someone would like to comment on? As a journalist, have you faced such conflicts, polemics?
Sure. One question if I could clarify quickly. Are you talking about government data that you have to pay for, or government data that private companies collect?
Mostly government data, which are being denied for journalists, but if a company pays or if they lobby enough,
yes,
they get it.
Yeah. It's a problem in the US. There's certain sets of data that you can get. It's open in the sense of anyone, if they have enough money, can pay for it. But it's so expensive, it's out of the reach of most journalists, most members of the public. There's a particular case I'm working on that I feel like exemplifies this pretty well. Our Customs and Border Protection Agency collects what they call shipping manifests, so basically the list of everything coming into the US. It's a government record, it really should, and there are parts of the law that say it is something that should be disclosed publicly, but the agency has created a sort of pseudo-public system where you pay what ends up being tens of thousands of dollars a year to get access to this data, and then they reject every FOIA for it. I actually just filed a second FOIA for this yesterday, and I'm working with some lawyers because we'll probably have to take it to court. There are some other cases similar in the US where the government tries to create pseudo-public data, and it shouldn't be allowed, at least in the US, and it is a big problem. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you, all of you, for coming, and please keep discussing outside.